The blood on her hands wasn't hers, but the shame certainly was. And as Catherine Thornton stumbled through the darkness of the Colorado Mountain Pass in the late autumn of 1876, she knew that turning 24 years old tomorrow would mean absolutely nothing if she didn't survive the night. She had never celebrated a birthday in her entire life. Not once. Her father had considered such frivolities wasteful, unnecessary indulgences that served no purpose in their strict household back in St. Louis. After her mother died when Catherine was only 6 years old, birthdays became just another day, marked only by the turning of calendar pages and the relentless march of time. Her father had hired a succession of governesses who taught her to read, write, and keep a proper household, but none of them had ever baked her a cake, or sung her a song, or made her feel special for simply existing another year. Now, running from the consequences of defending herself against a man who had tried to force himself upon her in the boarding house where she worked, Catherine wondered if she would even see another birthday at all. The October wind cut through her thin dress like knives, and her boots were soaked through from crossing a stream she could barely see in the moonlight. She had grabbed what little money she had saved and fled Denver 3 days ago, taking the first stagecoach heading west into the mountains, then walking when her funds ran out. The altitude made her lungs burn with every breath. She had no food, no proper coat, and no idea where she was going. All she knew was that the man she had struck with a fireplace poker had friends, dangerous friends who wouldn't care that he had been attacking her. They would only see that a working girl had dared to fight back, and they would make her pay for it. Catherine's foot caught on a root and she went down hard, her palms scraping against the rocky ground. She lay there for a moment, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. This wasn't how she had imagined her life would turn out. She had dreamed of something more, something better, but those dreams seemed impossibly distant now. A sound in the darkness made her freeze. Footsteps. Heavy ones. A man's footsteps. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide in the dense forest that surrounded her. The moon provided just enough light to see the massive silhouette approaching through the trees. "Please," she whispered, though she didn't know if she was praying or begging. "Please, not like this." The figure stopped about 10 feet away. "You're on private land," a deep voice said, rough as gravel but not immediately threatening. "And you're making enough noise to wake every bear between here and Wyoming." Catherine's breath came in short gasps. She couldn't see his face clearly in the shadows, but she could tell he was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed as wide as an axe handle. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll leave." "Leave to where?" The man took a step closer and the moonlight caught his features. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark beard, long hair that fell past his shoulders, and eyes that seemed to assess her with unsettling accuracy. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even beneath the heavy flannel shirt he wore. "Nearest town is 15 miles north." "You won't make it through the night dressed like that." "I'll manage," Catherine said, though her voice shook with cold and fear. "No, you won't." He moved closer still, and she could see the concern in his expression now, not menace. "You're half frozen already. When did you last eat?" Catherine couldn't remember. Yesterday, the day before. Time had blurred together in her desperation to put distance between herself and Denver. "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." The man sighed heavily. "My cabin is about a quarter mile from here. You can warm up, get some food, and we'll figure out what to do with you in the morning." Every instinct Catherine had developed working in boarding houses and saloons in rough towns told her not to trust strange men, especially not ones who lived alone in the mountains. but every instinct she had for survival told her she wouldn't last until dawn without shelter. "How do I know you won't hurt me?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. The man was quiet for a moment. "I suppose you don't, but if I wanted to hurt you, I could have done it already. I'm offering you help, nothing more. What you do with that offer is your choice." Catherine studied him, trying to read his intentions in the darkness. There was something about the way he stood, solid and unmovable like the mountains themselves, that made her want to believe him. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the bone-deep cold that had her teeth chattering, but she found herself nodding. "All right," she said. "Thank you." "Name's Tobias," he said, turning to lead the way through the forest. "Tobias Turner." "Catherine Thornton," she replied, following him on unsteady legs. Tobias moved through the trees with the easy confidence of someone who knew every root and rock by heart. Catherine struggled to keep up, her wet boots squelching with every step. True to his word, they reached a cabin within about 15 minutes, though it felt like an eternity to Catherine's freezing body. The cabin was larger than she had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. Tobias pushed open the heavy wooden door and gestured for her to enter first. Catherine hesitated on the threshold, but the promise of shelter overcame her remaining caution. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well kept. There was a large fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books, and a bed in the corner covered with thick furs. Everything was neat and organized, not at all what she had expected from a man living alone in the wilderness. Tobias moved past her to the fireplace and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, flames were crackling to life, casting warm light and blessed heat into the space. Catherine moved toward it instinctively, holding her numb hands out toward the warmth. "Sit," Tobias said, pulling one of the chairs closer to the fire. "You need to get out of those wet boots before you lose your toes." Catherine sank into the chair gratefully, but her fingers were too cold and clumsy to manage the laces on her boots. After watching her struggle for a moment, Tobias knelt in front of her and gently pushed her hands aside. "Let me," he said quietly. There was something strangely intimate about having this massive, rough-looking man carefully unlace her boots and pull them off, along with her soaked stockings. His hands were large and calloused, but surprisingly gentle. He didn't linger or make her feel uncomfortable, simply set her boots near the fire to dry and stood up. "I'll make some coffee and food," he said. "There's a blanket on the bed. Wrap yourself in it." Catherine did as she was told, retrieving the heavy wool blanket and wrapping it around her shoulders. The shivers that racked her body were starting to ease as the fire's warmth seeped into her bones. She watched Tobias move around the cabin, filling a battered coffee pot with water from a bucket and setting it on a hook over the fire, then pulling out supplies to make a simple meal. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, more to break the silence than out of real curiosity. "5 years," Tobias replied, slicing salt pork into a heavy iron skillet. "Built this place myself after I left the army. You were a soldier, cavalry. Got tired of taking orders and watching good men die for bad reasons." He set the skillet on the fire and the meat began to sizzle. "Figured the mountains would be more peaceful." "And are they?" Catherine asked. Tobias glanced at her, a hint of something that might have been humor in his dark eyes. "Usually. At least until strange women start wandering through my forest in the middle of the night." Despite everything, Catherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I apologize for the intrusion. Don't." He added some beans to the pan along with the meat. "Just tell me what you're running from." The smile disappeared. Catherine pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "What makes you think I'm running from something?" because nobody ends up in these mountains by accident, especially not a woman alone with no supplies and no proper clothes for the weather. Tobias stirred the food, not looking at her. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But I've found that most troubles seem a little smaller when you share the weight. Catherine was silent for a long moment, watching the firelight play across his rugged features. There was something about Tobias that made her want to trust him, something solid and dependable that she had never encountered in a man before. "There was a man in Denver," she said finally, "at the boarding house where I worked. He came to my room late one night and he tried to force himself on me. I fought back, hit him with a poker from the fireplace. There was blood and I panicked and ran. He has friends, dangerous friends. I knew they would come after me." Tobias's jaw tightened, the muscles in his forearms flexing as he gripped the spoon harder. "Did you kill him?" "I don't know," Catherine admitted. "I didn't stay to find out." He nodded slowly. "You did what you had to do to protect yourself. No shame in that." "The law might not see it that way," Catherine said quietly. "I'm just a working girl. He was someone important." "The law isn't always right," Tobias said. He pulled the skillet off the fire and divided the food onto 2 tin plates, handing one to Catherine along with a fork. "Eat. You'll feel better with something in your stomach." The food was simple but hot and filling, and Catherine realized she was ravenous. She ate quickly, burning her tongue slightly in her haste. Tobias ate more slowly, watching the fire more than he watched her. "You can sleep here tonight," he said when they had both finished. "I'll take the floor." "I can't take your bed," Catherine protested. "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "You need proper rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Catherine wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to help me." "Maybe not," Tobias agreed. "But my mother raised me to believe that how we treat people when no one's watching says everything about who we really are. Get some sleep, Catherine." She moved to the bed, still wrapped in the blanket, and lay down on top of the furs. They were incredibly soft and warm, smelling faintly of pine and wood smoke. Tobias added another log to the fire and then spread a bedroll on the floor on the opposite side of the cabin, giving her as much space and privacy as the small dwelling allowed. Catherine closed her eyes, certain she would be too nervous to sleep with a strange man in the same room, but her exhausted body had other ideas. Within minutes, she was drifting off, warmer and safer than she had felt in weeks. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back and she sat up quickly. Tobias was sitting at the table, drinking coffee and reading what looked like a well-worn copy of Homer's Odyssey. He glanced up when she stirred. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready if you want some." Catherine pushed her hair back from her face, suddenly self-conscious. She must look terrible with 3 days of travel dirt on her and her dress wrinkled from sleeping in it. "What time is it?" "About 9. Tobias closed his book and stood to pour her a cup of coffee. "You slept hard. Didn't even stir when I brought in more firewood." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. "I should probably go. I've imposed on your hospitality enough." "Go where?" Tobias asked reasonably. "You said yourself that you're being hunted. These mountains are big, but they're not that big. If someone's determined to find you, they will eventually." Catherine's shoulders slumped. She had been trying not to think about that. "Then what do you suggest I do?" Tobias was quiet for a moment, studying her with those dark, perceptive eyes. "You could stay here for a while. Let things cool down in Denver. Maybe in a few months, when nobody's looking for you anymore, you could move on to somewhere new, start fresh." "Stay here," Catherine repeated, With you, I've got more space than I need and I could use help around the place. He gestured toward the cabin. I'm not much for cooking or mending or any of the domestic things. You'd be earning your keep, not accepting charity. It was a practical offer, and Catherine recognized the kindness in the way he framed it. But she also knew what people would think if they knew she was living alone with a man in the mountains. I don't want to ruin your reputation, she said. Tobias actually laughed at that, a deep rumbling sound. My reputation, Catherine, I'm a hermit living alone in the wilderness. I don't have a reputation to ruin, and there's nobody up here to gossip even if I did. Still, Catherine said hesitantly, it wouldn't be proper. Proper went out the window when you started running for your life, Tobias pointed out. Right now, you need to worry about staying alive and staying free. Everything else is secondary. He was right, Catherine knew. She had no money, no supplies, and nowhere else to go. Tobias was offering her a lifeline, and she would be a fool not to take it. All right, she said. But only until it's safe for me to leave. I don't want to be a burden. You won't be, Tobias assured her. Now, I don't know when your birthday is, but I'm going to guess it's relatively soon given that tomorrow's the 24th of October. Catherine stared at him in shock. How did you know? You mentioned it last night when we were walking to the cabin. You were talking to yourself, something about turning 24 tomorrow meaning nothing if you died in the cold. Tobias poured himself more coffee. So happy birthday, Catherine Thornton. Let's make sure you survive to see many more. Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes, unexpected and sudden. In all the chaos and fear of the past few days, she had almost forgotten. Tomorrow she would turn 24, and for the first time in her life, someone had actually acknowledged it. Thank you, she whispered. Tobias looked uncomfortable with her emotion. It's just a birthday. Not to me, Catherine said. I've never celebrated one before, he frowned at that. Never, not even as a child, Catherine shook her head. My father didn't believe in such things. He said they were frivolous wastes of time and resources. After my mother died, there was no one else to argue otherwise. Tobias's expression darkened with something that looked like anger, though Catherine sensed it wasn't directed at her. Well, he said gruffly, that's going to change. Starting tomorrow. The rest of that day passed in a blur of mundane tasks that somehow felt significant. Tobias showed Catherine around his property, which included not just the cabin but a small barn with 2 horses, a goat for milk, and several chickens. He had a vegetable garden, now mostly harvested for winter, and a smokehouse where he preserved meat from his hunting. You're very self-sufficient, Catherine observed as they fed the chickens together. Have to be up here, Tobias replied. Nearest town is Concord, about 15 miles north through rough terrain. I usually only go down once a month or so for supplies I can't make or grow myself. Don't you get lonely? Catherine asked. Tobias was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted. But I prefer my own company to most people's. Present company accepted, of course. Catherine felt a small flutter in her chest at those words, though she told herself it was ridiculous. She barely knew this man. He was helping her out of kindness, nothing more. That evening, Tobias insisted on making dinner himself, telling Catherine to rest and recover from her ordeal. She sat by the fire, mending a tear in one of his shirts that she had noticed hanging on a peg, and watched him work. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, economical and sure, every motion purposeful. Where did you grow up? She asked as he stirred something that smelled delicious in a pot over the fire. Montana, Tobias said. Little ranch outside Helena. My father raised cattle and horses. I was the youngest of 4 boys. You still have family there? No. Father died in a riding accident when I was 16. Mother followed him 2 years later. My brothers scattered after that, Last I heard, one was in California, one in Texas, and one dead from cholera. He said it matter-of-factly, but Catherine heard the old pain beneath the words. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago." Tobias ladled stew into bowls and brought one to her. "What about you? Any family besides your father?" "No," Catherine said. "Just him, and we were never close. He died 3 years ago and left me nothing but debts. That's when I started working in boarding houses, trying to make my own way." They ate in companionable silence, and Catherine marveled at how comfortable she felt with this near stranger. Perhaps it was because he didn't seem to want anything from her beyond honest work and honest conversation. There was no predatory gleam in his eyes, no expectation that she owed him anything for his help. When they finished eating, Tobias surprised her by pulling out a harmonica and playing a few soft melodies while she cleaned up. The music was simple but beautiful, filling the cabin with unexpected warmth. "You're talented," Catherine said when he paused. "I'm passable," Tobias corrected. "But it helps pass the long winter evenings." That night, Catherine insisted on taking the floor despite Tobias's protests, arguing that she had taken advantage of his hospitality enough. They compromised by both using bedrolls on opposite sides of the cabin, with the fire between them. As Catherine lay in the darkness, listening to the crackling of the fire and the wind in the trees outside, she realized she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe, protected. For the first time since her mother died, someone was looking out for her without expecting anything in return. She fell asleep with a small smile on her face. The next morning, Catherine woke to the smell of something sweet baking. She sat up, confused, and saw Tobias pulling what looked like a small cake from the Dutch oven he had nested in the coals of the fire. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making a birthday cake," Tobias said, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Well, more of a sweetbread really, since I don't have proper cake ingredients, but it'll do." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes again. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." Tobias set the bread on the table to cool and turned to face her. His long hair was tied back with a leather cord, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing the powerful muscles of his forearms. "But you said you'd never celebrated your birthday before. Seemed like that needed to change." He had also, Catherine noticed, picked wildflowers and put them in a tin cup on the table. It was such a simple gesture, but it touched her more deeply than she could express. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll eat breakfast with me and we'll call it even." Tobias cut 2 slices of the still warm bread and handed one to her. It was slightly dense and not very sweet, made with honey instead of sugar. But to Catherine, it tasted better than the finest cake she could imagine. They ate together at the little table, and for the first time in her 24 years, Catherine felt like her birthday actually mattered. "Thank you," she said when they finished. "This means more to me than you could possibly know." Tobias looked uncomfortable again, shifting in his chair. "Everyone deserves to feel special on their birthday. It's not right that you never have." "My father would have said this was wasteful and indulgent," Catherine said. "Well, your father was wrong." Tobias's voice was firm. "There's nothing wasteful about acknowledging that someone's life has value, that they matter. If more people took the time to celebrate each other, the world might be a kinder place." Catherine studied him, this rough mountain man with his surprisingly gentle heart. "How is it that you ended up alone up here? You're not like anyone I've ever met." "Maybe that's why I'm up here," Tobias said with a slight smile. "Never could quite fit in down in the towns and cities. Too much noise, too many people pretending to be something they're not. Up here, you can just be yourself." "And who are you, Tobias Turner?" Catherine asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. but I know I'm someone who believes in treating people with decency and respect. Someone who thinks strength should be used to protect, not to harm. Someone who values honest work and honest living. He met her eyes. What about you? Who is Catherine Thornton when she's not running for her life? Catherine had to think about that. I suppose I'm someone who's never really had the chance to find out, she said slowly. My whole life has been about survival, about doing what I had to do to get by. I've never had the freedom to discover who I might be if I actually had choices. Well, Tobias said, maybe while you're here, you'll have that chance. The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine. Catherine took over the cooking and mending and helped with the animals. She discovered she had a knack for baking bread and making preserves. Tobias taught her how to milk the goat, how to collect eggs without disturbing the chickens, and how to identify which wild plants were edible. In return, she brought organization to the cabin that had been lacking. She mended all his clothes, cleaned and organized his shelves, and even fashioned curtains for the windows from some spare fabric she found. Tobias protested that she was working too hard, but Catherine insisted. She needed to feel useful to earn her place. You don't have to prove anything, Tobias told her one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. You're not a burden, Catherine. I need to contribute, Catherine said. I've been dependent on others my whole life, at their mercy. I need to know I can take care of myself. You can, Tobias assured her. You survived 3 days in the wilderness with nothing. You fought off an attacker. You're stronger than you think. Catherine wasn't sure she believed him, but his words warmed her nonetheless. As October turned to November, the weather grew colder and the first snows began to fall. Tobias spent his days chopping firewood and making sure everything was secured for winter. Catherine helped where she could, though she quickly learned she didn't have the strength for the heavier tasks. One particularly cold evening, as they huddled close to the fire, Tobias asked about her life in Denver. Catherine found herself telling him things she had never told anyone else. About the loneliness of working in the boarding house, the constant worry about money, the men who thought she was available for more than just cooking and cleaning their rooms. I was so tired of being afraid all the time, she admitted. Of wondering if I would have enough to eat, or if someone would try to take advantage of me, or if I would end up sick and destitute with no one to care. It felt like I was drowning, just barely keeping my head above water. Tobias listened without interrupting, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You don't have to be afraid here, he said finally. I know that's easy to say and harder to believe, but I mean it. As long as you're under my roof, you're under my protection. Nobody will hurt you. The fierce certainty in his voice made Catherine's breath catch. She believed him. This man, with his massive shoulders and powerful arms, his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, would protect her. More than that, she realized she wanted him to. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked softly. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Tobias was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, because everyone deserves kindness, especially people who haven't received enough of it. And because there's something about you that makes me want to see you smile, to see you safe and happy. He paused. Is that all right? Catherine's heart was hammering in her chest. Yes, she whispered. That's all right. Something shifted between them that night. The air felt charged, full of possibility. They sat closer together by the fire, and when their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same piece of firewood, neither of them pulled away immediately. Catherine had never felt this way about a man before. The men she had known were crude, selfish, taking what they wanted without care for anyone else. Tobias was different. He was strong enough to break her in half, but he used that strength only to chop wood and carry water and protect her from the cold and danger. As the days grew shorter and the snow piled higher, Catherine found herself watching Tobias more and more. The way he moved, all controlled power and masculine grace. The way his hair fell forward when he bent over a task, and he would push it back with one large hand. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, with something that might have been longing in his eyes. One morning in mid-November, Catherine woke to find the world transformed by a heavy overnight snow. Everything was buried under at least 2 feet of white, and more was still falling. "We're snowed in for a while," Tobias said, looking out the window. "This is a big one. Might be days before I can even get to the barn." He spent the morning digging a path to the animals, making sure they had food and water. Catherine watched from the window, marveling at the way he moved through the deep snow, his powerful body making it look easy even though she knew it must be exhausting work. When he came back inside, his face was red from the cold, and his hair was full of snowflakes. He shook them off near the door, laughing at the small avalanche they created. "It's beautiful out there," he said. "Terrible for traveling, but beautiful." Catherine helped him out of his heavy coat and handed him a cup of hot coffee she had kept warming by the fire. Their fingers touched as he took it, and the contact sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you," Tobias said, his voice rougher than usual. They were standing very close together, and Catherine could smell wood smoke and pine, and the unique scent that was just Tobias. He was so tall that she had to tilt her head back to look at him, and when she did, she found him staring down at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Catherine," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" she whispered. "I know you're planning to leave in the spring when it's safe. I know that's the sensible thing, the right thing, but I need you to know that I don't want you to go." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin with heartbreaking gentleness. "You've made this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. You've made every day feel like something worth celebrating just by being in it." Catherine's breath caught. "Tobias, you don't have to say anything right now," he interrupted. "I just needed you to know. I care about you, Catherine, more than I probably should after such a short time." "It doesn't feel like a short time," Catherine said, reaching up to cover his hand with her own. "It feels like I've known you forever. Like I've been looking for you my whole life without knowing it." Tobias's eyes darkened. "Can I kiss you, please?" Catherine breathed. He set down his coffee and bent his head to hers, and when their lips met, Catherine felt like she was finally coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when Catherine made a small sound of pleasure, Tobias deepened it, pulling her closer against his massive frame. Catherine had been kissed before, hasty stolen kisses from boys who didn't mean anything. This was completely different. This was Tobias pouring all his strength and tenderness into showing her how much she mattered, how precious she was to him. His arms wrapped around her, making her feel safe and cherished and desired all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Tobias rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I've wanted you to," Catherine said. "I was just afraid to hope that you might feel the same way I do." "And how do you feel?" Tobias asked. Catherine took a breath, gathering her courage. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been since the night you found me in the forest and offered me shelter without asking for anything in return." Tobias's whole face softened into an expression of such pure joy that it took Catherine's breath away. "I'm falling in love with you too," he said. "Hell, I might have already fallen. All I know is that every morning I wake up grateful that you're here, and every night I go to sleep thinking about how much brighter you make everything." Catherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. No one has ever made me feel the way you do, like I matter, like my existence is something to celebrate. Because it is, Tobias said fiercely. You matter more than you know, Catherine Thornton. They spent the rest of that snowy day wrapped in each other's arms by the fire, talking and kissing and making quiet plans for a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. Tobias told her about his dreams of expanding the cabin, maybe raising cattle or horses like his father had. Catherine told him about her secret wish to learn how to read better, to maybe have books of her own someday. I can teach you, Tobias offered. I've got plenty of books and nowhere to go until the snow melts. So they added reading lessons to their daily routine. Every evening after dinner, Tobias would sit with Catherine and help her work through whatever book she had chosen. He was patient and encouraging, never making her feel stupid when she struggled with a difficult word. Catherine discovered she loved reading. She devoured books on everything from poetry to practical farming guides. Tobias watched her growing confidence with obvious pride, and that made her love him even more. As November turned to December, they grew closer in every way. They had moved the bedrolls next to each other and would fall asleep holding hands across the small space between them. Sometimes Catherine would wake in the night to find Tobias watching her with such tenderness that it made her chest ache. "What are you thinking?" she would whisper. "That I want to marry you," he would reply. "That I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how loved you are." "Is that a proposal?" Catherine asked one night. Tobias was quiet for a moment. "Not yet. I want to do it properly when I can give you a ring and make it official." "But yes, Catherine, when the time is right, I'm going to ask you to be my wife. I hope you'll say yes." "I will," Catherine said simply. "Whenever you ask, the answer will be yes." They sealed the promise with a kiss that quickly grew heated. Tobias pulled back before things could go too far, his breathing ragged. "I want to wait," he said. "I want to do this right, make you my wife properly before we take that step." Catherine appreciated his respect, even as her body ached for more. "Then you had better propose soon," she teased. "I will," Tobias promised. "I'm working on something." Catherine wondered what he meant, but he wouldn't say more. She noticed he spent some of his evenings working on something small, using tools she didn't recognize, but he always hid it away when he saw her watching. Christmas came, and Tobias surprised her by producing a small pine tree that he had cut and brought inside. They decorated it with strings of dried berries and small carved ornaments that Tobias had been making in secret. "I've never had a Christmas tree before," Catherine said, delighted. "I know," Tobias replied. Figured it was time to make up for all those missed celebrations. He had also made her a present, a beautiful wooden box with her initials carved into the lid, perfect for keeping her few precious belongings. Catherine cried when she opened it, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "I didn't make you anything," she said, ashamed. "You gave me the greatest gift I could ask for," Tobias said, pulling her into his arms. "You gave me yourself, your trust, your love. That's worth more than anything I could ever make or buy." On Christmas night, as they sat by the fire eating the special dinner Catherine had prepared, Tobias suddenly stood up and moved to the mantel. He retrieved something small from behind a tin cup and turned to face her. Catherine's heart began to pound. Tobias dropped to one knee in front of her chair, holding out a ring he had clearly crafted himself from silver. It was simple but beautiful, with a small pattern of mountains etched into the band. "Catherine Thornton," he said, his deep voice rough with emotion. "I know we haven't known each other very long by conventional standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You've brought light and laughter and love into my world. You've made this cabin a home and my life worth living. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you feel celebrated and cherished and loved. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Catherine said through happy tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Tobias slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and then he was kissing her, lifting her up and spinning her around in a circle while they both laughed with pure joy. "How did you make this?" Catherine asked, when they finally calmed down enough to examine the ring properly. "I used to do some metal work on my father's ranch," Tobias explained. "I've kept the tools, though I don't use them much anymore. I've been working on it for weeks, trying to get it just right for you." "It's perfect," Catherine assured him. "You're perfect." "Not even close," Tobias said with a smile. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be perfect for you." They talked late into the night about their future. Tobias wanted to marry her as soon as possible, but the snow made travel impossible. They would have to wait until spring, when they could make the journey to Concord to find a preacher. "I don't care how long we have to wait," Catherine said. "As long as I'm with you, I'm happy." That night, they moved the bedrolls together properly, and Catherine fell asleep in Tobias's arms, his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. She had never felt more safe, more loved, more at peace. January and February passed in a blur of snow and happiness. Catherine and Tobias were completely snowed in, unable to leave the cabin for days at a time, but neither of them minded. They were wrapped in their own little world, planning their future and falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Tobias taught Catherine how to shoot, how to track animals in the snow, how to read the weather signs. Catherine taught him how to make better bread, how to darn socks so they didn't rub, how to laugh at himself when things went wrong. They talked about everything under the sun. Politics and philosophy, dreams and fears, silly childhood memories and painful losses. Catherine told Tobias about the loneliness of her childhood, the ache of growing up without her mother's love or her father's approval. Tobias told her about the horrors he had seen in the cavalry, the friends he had lost, the nightmares that still sometimes woke him in the darkness. "You make the nightmares go away," he told her one morning after she had soothed him back to sleep following a bad dream. "When you're in my arms, the past can't touch me." "Good," Catherine said fiercely, "because you make me feel like I finally have a future worth looking forward to." In March, the snow finally began to melt in earnest. Tobias was able to check his trap lines again and start preparing the garden for spring planting. Catherine helped where she could, relishing the feel of the sun on her face and the fresh air in her lungs. "You think anyone is still looking for me?" she asked one day as they worked together to clear the garden plot. Tobias paused in his digging. "I doubt it," he said honestly. "It's been almost 6 months. If the man you hit survived, he's probably moved on, and if he didn't, they would have given up the search by now. Either way, I think you're safe." "Do you think we could go to Concord soon?" Catherine asked hopefully. "I'd like to be properly married before summer." "How about next week?" Tobias suggested, grinning at her delighted squeal. "The trails should be clear enough by then. We can take the horses and make it in a day if we start early." The week passed in a flurry of preparation. Catherine washed and mended her best dress, though it was still pretty worn after months of hard use. Tobias cleaned and oiled his saddles and made sure both horses were in good condition for the journey. The night before they were set to leave, Catherine was sitting by the fire trying to make her hair look presentable when Tobias came up behind her. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a wrapped bundle. Catherine opened it to find a beautiful new dress in a soft blue fabric. It was simple but well made, with delicate buttons up the front and lace at the collar. "Where did you get this?" she asked in amazement. "I ordered it months ago, last time I was in town," Tobias admitted. I had the shopkeeper keep it there until I could pick it up. I wanted you to have something special to wear when we got married." Catherine threw her arms around his neck, overcome with emotion. "You're too good to me." "Impossible," Tobias said, kissing her forehead. "You deserve all the good things in the world." They set out early the next morning under a clear blue sky. The ride to Concord was long but beautiful, with wildflowers starting to bloom along the trail and birds singing in the trees. Catherine rode beside Tobias on the gentle mare he had chosen for her, and they talked and laughed the whole way. Concord was larger than Catherine had expected, a proper town with several streets of businesses and houses. Tobias led them directly to the church, a white clapboard building with a tall steeple. The preacher was an elderly man named Reverend Caldwell who had known Tobias for several years. He was delighted to hear about their plans to marry and agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. "Don't you want to wait?" he asked. "Have a proper wedding with guests and celebration." "We've already waited long enough," Tobias said, looking at Catherine with such love that she felt her heart might burst. "And the only celebration we need is each other." So they were married right there in the little church, with only Reverend Caldwell and his wife as witnesses. Catherine wore her beautiful blue dress and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Tobias had picked for her along the trail. Tobias wore his best clothes and had tied his long hair back neatly, when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and told Tobias he could kiss his bride. Catherine felt tears of joy streaming down her face. This was everything she had never dared to dream of. A man who loved her completely, who made her feel like every day was a celebration just because she existed. "I love you, Mrs. Turner," Tobias murmured against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Turner," Catherine replied, laughing through her tears. They stayed in Concord that night at the town's small hotel, and Catherine finally knew what it was to be truly loved by the man she had married. Tobias was patient and gentle, taking his time to make sure she felt cherished and desired. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was everything Catherine had hoped it would be and more. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Tobias traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Catherine replied honestly. "You've given me everything I never knew I needed." "You did the same for me," Tobias said. "Before you came into my life, I was just existing. Now I'm truly living." They returned to the cabin the next day as husband and wife, ready to start their life together properly. Spring turned to summer, and Catherine threw herself into making the cabin truly feel like home. She planted a flower garden alongside the vegetable patch, made new curtains and cushions, and generally brought a woman's touch to the rustic dwelling. Tobias worked on expanding the cabin, adding a second room that would eventually serve as a bedroom for children, though they didn't speak of that yet. Catherine loved watching him work, the play of muscles across his back and arms as he lifted heavy logs into place. One hot afternoon in July, as Catherine was bringing him water, Tobias pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly despite the sweat and sawdust covering both of them. "What was that for?" Catherine asked breathlessly when he released her. "Just because," Tobias said with a grin. "Because you're beautiful and you're mine and I love you. Do I need a better reason?" "No," Catherine said, smiling up at him. "I suppose you don't." In August, Catherine realized she had missed her monthly cycle. At first, she thought it was just stress or the change in altitude or any of a dozen other explanations. But when September came and she still hadn't had her courses, and when she started feeling queasy in the mornings, she knew. She told Tobias one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. They had never explicitly discussed children, though they both knew it was a possibility. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice oddly tight. Pretty sure, Catherine said. The signs are all there. I think I'm about 2 months along. Tobias was very still for a moment, and Catherine's heart sank. Maybe he didn't want children. Maybe this would change how he felt about her. Then he let out a whoop of pure joy and lifted her into the air, spinning her around just like he had when she accepted his proposal. "We're having a baby," he exclaimed. "Catherine, we're going to be parents." Catherine laughed with relief and happiness. "You're happy about this?" "Happy." Tobias set her down gently, his large hands cradling her face. "I'm thrilled, ecstatic. I can't wait to meet this child we've made together." "I was worried you might not want this," Catherine admitted. "I want everything with you," Tobias said seriously. "Children, a whole house full of them if we're blessed that way. A long life together growing old and gray. Everything, Catherine, all of it." The pregnancy was not easy for Catherine. The morning sickness lasted well into her 4th month, and she was constantly exhausted. But Tobias was patient and attentive, taking over more of the household tasks and making sure she rested. "You're doing the hard work," he would say when she protested. "The least I can do is cook some meals and wash some dishes." As fall came again and Catherine's belly began to swell noticeably, she found herself thinking about how much had changed in a year. Last October, she had been running for her life, alone and terrified. Now she was safe and loved, married to a wonderful man and expecting their first child. On October 23rd, the day before her 25th birthday, Catherine went into labor. It was earlier than expected, and Tobias was immediately worried. "Should I ride for the doctor in Concord?" he asked frantically. "There's no time," Catherine gasped between contractions. "Besides, women have been having babies without doctors for thousands of years. We'll manage." Tobias looked terrified but determined. He had helped with animal births plenty of times, he told himself. How different could this be? Very different, it turned out. But despite his fear, Tobias was steady and calm, helping Catherine through each contraction, encouraging her when she wanted to give up, catching their baby when it finally emerged into the world in the early hours of October 24th. "It's a boy," Tobias said, his voice thick with awe and emotion. "Catherine, we have a son." He cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft blankets, then placed him in Catherine's arms. She looked down at their son's tiny, perfect face and felt love unlike anything she had ever experienced. "Happy birthday to me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Happy birthday, my love," Tobias said, kissing her forehead. "And happy birthday to our son." They named him Thomas after Tobias's father. He was small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Tobias was completely besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep or making silly faces to try to get him to smile. "You're going to spoil him," Catherine said fondly one afternoon as she watched Tobias rock their son. "That's my job as a father," Tobias replied with a grin. "To spoil him and protect him and teach him to be a good man." As winter closed in again, the cabin was filled with the sounds of baby cries and baby laughter. It was exhausting and wonderful, and everything Catherine had never known she wanted. On Christmas morning, as they sat by the fire with their 3-month-old son sleeping peacefully between them, Tobias pulled Catherine close. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Catherine asked. "For stumbling into my forest that night. For trusting me enough to stay. For marrying me and giving me a family and making every single day feel like a celebration." He kissed her gently. "I love you more than words can express, Catherine Turner." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "You saved my life in every way that matters. You showed me what it means to be loved, to be valued, to matter. You gave me the family I always wanted and the life I never thought I could have." The years that followed were filled with both challenges and joys. They had two more children, a daughter named Caroline born in 1879 and another son named Timothy in 1881. The cabin grew larger to accommodate their expanding family, and Tobias built a bigger barn to house more animals as he started raising horses to sell. Catherine learned to be confident in her own abilities, managing the household and raising the children while also helping Tobias with the farm work. She discovered she had a talent for training horses, working with the young colts with patience and gentleness that earned her a reputation throughout the region. They made trips to Concord several times a year, and Catherine slowly built friendships with other women in town. But she never forgot what it felt like to be alone and afraid, and she always went out of her way to help women who needed it, offering them work or shelter or just a kind word. Tobias remained her rock, steady and strong and unfailingly loving. He never forgot to make her birthdays special, always finding some way to celebrate the day, whether it was with a special meal or a small gift, or simply taking the time to tell her how much she meant to him. "You know you don't have to make such a fuss every year," Catherine told him on her 30th birthday, as he presented her with a beautiful handmade quilt he had commissioned from a woman in town. "Yes, I do," Tobias said seriously. "Because you went 24 years without anyone celebrating you, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making up for that." Their children grew strong and healthy, thriving in the mountain air. Thomas inherited his father's size and strength, while Caroline had her mother's quick mind and kind heart. Little Timothy was a perfect blend of both his parents, curious and adventurous and loving. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Catherine leaned her head on Tobias's broad shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me in that night? Your life would have been so much simpler without me." Tobias turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Catherine, finding you in those woods was the best thing that ever happened to me. Before you, I was just hiding from life, not really living it. You gave me purpose and joy and love. You gave me a family. Simple doesn't always mean better, and I wouldn't trade a single moment of our complicated, chaotic, beautiful life together for all the simplicity in the world." Catherine kissed him, still feeling that flutter in her chest that she had felt from their very first kiss. "I love you, Tobias Turner. Thank you for making every day feel like a celebration." "That's easy," Tobias said with a smile, "because being with you is the greatest celebration I could ever ask for." As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Catherine reflected on how far she had come. From a frightened woman running for her life to a beloved wife and mother, secure in the knowledge that she was cherished and valued. Thomas came running up to the porch, his 7-year-old face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can you teach me to shoot tomorrow, please?" Tobias laughed and ruffled his son's dark hair. "If your mother says it's all right." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Catherine expectantly. She pretended to consider seriously, though she had already decided to say yes. "All right," she agreed, "but you have to promise to listen carefully to everything your father tells you about gun safety." "I promise," Thomas exclaimed, then ran off to tell his siblings the good news. "You're too soft on them," Catherine teased. "Look who's talking," Tobias replied with a grin. "I saw you give Caroline an extra cookie this afternoon when you thought I wasn't looking." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade and listening to their children's laughter. These were the moments Catherine treasured most, the ordinary, everyday moments that somehow felt extraordinary because she was sharing them with the people she loved. Later that night, after the children were asleep and she and Tobias were lying in their bed, Catherine thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The fear and pain and struggle, yes, but also the unexpected kindness of a mountain man who had seen a frightened woman and offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. "What are you thinking about?" Tobias asked, his deep voice rumbling in the darkness. "About how grateful I am," Catherine said. "For you, for our children, for this life we've built together. I never knew I could be this happy." Tobias pulled her closer, his strong arms wrapping around her in a way that still made her feel completely safe. "Every day with you is a gift," he said. "Every morning I wake up next to you, I thank God for leading you to my forest that night." "Do you think everything happens for a reason?" Catherine asked. "I don't know," Tobias admitted, "but I do know that sometimes terrible things lead to beautiful outcomes. You had to go through hell to find your way to me, and I wish you hadn't suffered, but I'm grateful that your path led you here." Catherine thought about that. About the man who had attacked her, the fear that had driven her into the mountains, the desperation that had nearly killed her. It had been awful, traumatic, terrifying, but it had also led her to Tobias, to love, to a family and a life beyond her wildest dreams. "I'm grateful too," she said finally, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they made me strong enough to accept the good when it finally came." The next morning, Catherine woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Tobias moving quietly around the cabin, trying not to wake her. She smiled, recognizing the pattern. He was making her breakfast in bed, something he did at least once a week, even though she protested that she was perfectly capable of cooking her own breakfast. "I know you are," he would always say, "but that doesn't mean you have to." She lay still, listening to the sounds of her husband and children starting their day, and felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was her life now. Not perfect, certainly there were hard days and disagreements and struggles like any family had. But it was hers, chosen and built with love and intention. Caroline came running into the bedroom, her blonde curls bouncing. "Mama, Papa is making pancakes and he said I could help." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Catherine said, sitting up and reaching for her daughter. Caroline climbed into bed with her, snuggling close. "Mama, do you think Papa will teach me to shoot too?" she asked. "I'm sure he will when you're a little older," Catherine assured her. "Thomas says girls can't shoot as good as boys," Caroline said with a frown. "Well, Thomas is wrong," Catherine said firmly. "Girls can do anything boys can do if they practice and work hard. Your Papa knows that, and he'll make sure Thomas learns it too." "I'm going to be the best shot in the whole family," Caroline declared with childish confidence. "I believe you will be," Catherine said, kissing the top of her head. Tobias appeared in the doorway, little Timothy balanced on one hip and a plate of pancakes in his free hand. "Breakfast is served, my ladies." Catherine looked at her husband, still as strong and handsome as the day she met him despite the lines starting to form around his eyes and the few gray hairs appearing in his beard. She looked at her children, healthy and happy and full of life. She looked around the cabin they had turned into a home together, every corner filled with memories and love. "Thank you," she said to Tobias, and she meant it for so much more than just the breakfast. He seemed to understand, as he always did. "My pleasure," he said, his dark eyes warm. "Always and forever, my pleasure." As they gathered around the table together, saying grace before the meal, Catherine thought about how far she had come. From a woman who had never celebrated her own birthday to someone who felt celebrated every single day. From someone who had been alone and afraid to someone who was surrounded by love and family. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a strong young man, though he never quite matched his father's impressive build. He was kind and hardworking, with a natural talent for working with horses that made both his parents proud. Caroline became as good a shot as she had promised, and also developed a love of reading that rivaled her mother's. Timothy was the adventurer of the family, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief. Tobias's hair turned more gray than black, and his face became weathered from years of mountain sun and wind, but he remained strong and steady, the rock upon which their family was built. He and Catherine still took walks together in the evenings when the children were occupied, still held hands by the fire, still looked at each other with the same love and desire they had felt from the beginning. "You ever miss your old life?" Catherine asked him one evening as they sat on their porch watching yet another beautiful sunset. "What old life?" Tobias replied. "My real life started the night I found you in the forest. Everything before that was just waiting." Catherine smiled, leaning into his side. "You always know exactly what to say." "That's because it's the truth," Tobias said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Turner. Every day with you is better than the last." When Catherine turned,